Here we are on day 10 of our prayer and fasting, and we're in the second week, which is looking at the theme of repentance. Ooh, repentance. This morning I want to read from Romans chapter 2, and in this letter, Paul's writing to the churches in Rome, and at this point he's talked about God's anger with sin, and then he starts to look at God's judgment of sin. And as he starts talking to the believers in Rome, he kind of corrects their thinking about how they are condemning one another, or how they may react to the anger God has us for sin by judging each other. And he brings about a bit of correction to them. And there's a key verse in Romans chapter 2 verse 4 which really helps me when I think about the idea of repentance. Starting at verse 2, it says, "And we know that God in his justice will punish anyone who does such things. Since you judge others for doing these things, why do you think you can avoid God's judgment when you do the same things?" Verse 4 says, "Don't you see how wonderfully kind, tolerant, and patient God is with you? Does this mean nothing to you? Can't you see that his kindness is intended to turn you from sin?" I'll tell you why this is really helpful for me, because the word repentance has had at times, I guess, a negative connotation to it for me, in that I've felt like repentance was something that needed to be, was demanded of me. It was something that was at times scary. At times, repentance just felt like a bad idea. But seeing here, as Paul addresses the church, he reminds them that it's actually God's kindness that leads them to repentance. It's the character and the nature of God that enables us to empowers us to turn away from sin and to look to him. And so it's not a bad word. It's not a negative concept. Repentance is actually something that's really beautiful, because it's in his kindness that he draws us back into alignment with him, to turn away from the things that are breaking relationship with him, damaging relationship with others. And it's his loving kindness that leads us to that space. And so it's not something that we should be afraid of. It's not something that we should try and get away from. But in fact, repentance is a beautiful part of our lives as we want to follow Jesus. So as you consider today God's kindness that leads us to repentance, perhaps just to engage with him and think about some areas in your life where perhaps God is calling you to turn, or to turn back to him, and then to focus on his character and his nature. Not so much on the command to turn, but on who he is and his heart to draw you to look to him. It's his kindness that leads us to repentance.